Tick-tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all around the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, D. Wood. And with me now is the guy who taught your great-granddaddy about jihad, because that's how long he's been doing it. Robert Spencer. How you doing, Robert?
I am doing great, David. How are you, sir?
Good. Now, Robert, we are about to jump into this week in jihad. So, has some stuff happened this week before we even get started? Has anything happened this week? Because it seems quiet. There's no 9/11. There's no 7/7. This is a down week for jihadis. But is there stuff to talk about?
Very much so. This has been a very busy week for the jihad.
Wow.
Most people don't realize that it is going on every day. And at Jihad Watch, we cover it, but we never are able to cover all of it. There is always more.
And for anyone who hasn't been following Robert's website, the link is in the description box. Also got a link there to the greatest book on jihad there is, apart from maybe the Quran. Well, I guess the Quran doesn't give you the history of jihad, so it just gives you a playbook.
Yes.
It gives you a playbook. But I also have a link to Robert's book, The History of Jihad. If you don't have that book, you definitely want to get a copy. If you can read the entire thing, you'll see how absolutely relentless jihad has been for the past 14 centuries. And if you look at it and say, well, that's kind of a big book, at least get the chapter on Muhammad down, and then if you can, get the chapter on the rightly guided caliphs down and what they were doing. Awesome information. All right, now, Robert, before we jump into this week in jihad, I was wondering if you could just give everyone an idea of what jihad is.
David, jihad is a central concept in Islam. And it means struggle in Arabic, and there are very many struggles in Arabic, just as there are very many struggles in English. You can struggle to quit smoking or lose weight. You can also have a titanic civilizational struggle against communism, or in our case, for communism. And in the theology of Islam and the law of Islam, the primary meaning of jihad is warfare against unbelievers in order to subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law, which mandates a second-class status for them.
Now, you said that's the primary meaning, but you acknowledge that there are other meanings because, as you brought up,
Yes.
You can have a struggle against, let's say, weight or something like that. Because I remember this that campaign that's my jihad, what's yours? And it was all like, I struggle to get to the gym after dropping my kids off at school. That's my jihad, what's yours? And they made it look like, jihad is basically a struggle against anything. And so you're acknowledging that, yeah, insofar as what the word means, means struggle, so you can have a jihad against all kinds of things. But it looks like, according to you, what you're saying is that when people are trying to make it sound as if that's the main meaning, just your daily struggles in life against anything, it's not the main meaning.
Exactly, precisely. That is the problem with that campaign, My Jihad, that it was misleading. It was trying to give the impression that jihad was entirely benign by invoking benign usages of the term. None of those were wrong. All of them were right. But they were not the only meaning of jihad, and they weren't even the main meaning of jihad in Islam. And if you read the Quran and you see all the uses of jihad, which is sometimes difficult, until you get my critical Quran, which has been delayed by the paper shortages but will be out in May, you will read most translations of the Quran in English and you'll get strive hard in the way of Allah. And you won't know necessarily, unless you have studied, that strive hard is jihad. And that the primary understanding in Islamic theology of those passages exhorting people to strive or wage jihad in the way of Allah is warfare, and primarily warfare against unbelievers.
Now, Robert, I have to confess, you're sounding a little bit like an Islamophobe when you're saying these things. So Before we jump into the topic of Ilhan Omar's Islamophobia Bill, what is Islamophobia?
Well, you know, David, that's the key question. That's the burning question. And since you mentioned Ilhan Omar's Islamophobia bill, I have to note that it does not define Islamophobia. And that the big problem that we face with this Islamophobia bill is that Islamophobia as a term has been used in the recent past for two quite distinct phenomena. And they are, in the first place, vigilante attacks against innocent Muslims, which are never justified. And second, honest analysis of the motivating ideology of jihad terrorism, which is always necessary. And in order to stigmatize and silence that analysis, they use the same term as they use for the vigilante attacks, so as to give the impression that if you speak honestly about what jihad means for Muslims and what jihad attacks actually are and what motivates them, then you are leading to those vigilante attacks against innocent Muslims and therefore must be silenced. And that's the insidious aspect of her bill.
Well, that's disturbing because in philosophy, more specifically in the branch of philosophy called logic, that's a logical fallacy called equivocation, where you change the meaning of a term. And so what you're saying is that someone would go up and say, hey, some random person went and attacked a Muslim because that person is a Muslim. You're against that, aren't you? Yes, I'm against that. Well, then you're against Islamophobia. So you're against Islamophobia, aren't you? Well, yeah, if that's what Islamophobia is, then I'm against Islamophobia. But you're saying that then they changed the definition. Okay, well, then you're against anyone who says anything against Islam or anyone who actually quotes the Muslim sources accurately and tells what it calls for. And so you're against all that, too. And so it's this idea of what we want is to shut down criticism of Islam and any honest report on what it calls for as far as calls for the violent subjugation of the world, calls for the killing of apostates, allows men to beat their wives into submission, allows the victors in a war to take the women and girls as their sex slaves. When we say that, you want to shut that down. But you can't say, especially in Western context, you can't say, hey, you can't criticize taking women as sex slaves. You can't do that, because then people say, well, of course you can. Of course you can criticize that. What are you talking about? So you have to say, are you against this phobia? Well, yeah, I'm against the phobia, but then you're saying they change the meaning of the phobia as they go along.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's no accident at all that the bill does not define Islamophobia precisely so that that kind of equivocation can be carried out. Mm-hmm. And that's also underscored by the fact that the bill itself talks about wanting to stop racial attacks against Muslims. Now, Islam, as you and I both well know, is not a race.
Racial attacks against Muslims.
Exactly.
So now, would Christians and atheists be a race then too?
Well, they're not mentioned, so I don't know. But you know what's funny about this is that also this week in Jihad, after years and years of calling people who are critics of jihad terror and Sharia oppression racist, a Muslim professor this week wrote an article explaining how terrible it was to act as if Muslims were a racial group. And yet that's exactly what Ilhan Omar's Islamophobia bill does. And it gives the impression that any criticism of Islam is going to be taken as incitement to violence and thus must be silenced.
Yeah, because that's the disturbing part, right? In that you've experienced this thousands and thousands of times. I've experienced this thousands and thousands of times. We say something obvious and straightforward, something that Muslim apologists, anyone who's being honest, will acknowledge. The penalty for leaving Islam is death, and we'll say something like that, and then we will be called Islamophobes for saying this. So here's what's disturbing: you've got the government now says, okay, now we've got this special envoy who's tasked with combating Islamophobia. We're not defining what Islamophobia is, but as long as Islamophobia is not defined, tons of people say that what we do is Islamophobia, even if it's just straightforward reporting facts. So now, as far as this term without any definition is going to be part of law, then we're under the government is now supposed to combat us because we're because we're Islamophobes, right?
And the groundwork for this has been being laid for years, and it all works in the same direction. For example, I was just telling you right before we came on that I myself am a violent extremist. And
I'm glad you're admitting this.
The Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, which is the counterterror arm created by Microsoft, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all of those social media giants. They published a list of groups that they intend to silence and drive off the internet altogether because they are either terrorists or violent extremists.
Got to be one or the other.
Okay. Category was my website Jihad Watch. And now I thought this was not only absurd but libelous, and so I got a lawyer to write to these people and demand a retraction and so on and so on, and they refused. They said, look at Jihad Watch. It's talking about violent actions by Muslims. That's going to lead to that's incitement to violence against Muslims. Now, this is absolutely absurd. The only genuine incitement to violence is if you're saying go and be violent against some group, which I've never commanded or condoned or approved or called for any violence. But what they want to do is portray any speech critical of Islam as leading to violence and shut it down on that basis. And now the Islamophobia Bill is going to help accomplish that as well.
Yeah, and what shocks me is the just complete hypocrisy as far as what you were just saying. And let me go ahead and read what Ilhan Omar said on the House floor when she was promoting this. She said, until everyone is free to practice their religion, no one is. Now, that's just it's just an idiotic comment. Until every last person in the world is free to practice their religion, not one person is. That's ridiculous, right? So notice, if everyone in the United States were completely free to practice their religion, as long as one person in Pakistan isn't, then no one's free. So it's kind of a silly comment. But let's take that seriously for a second. Until everyone is free to practice their religion, no one is. Now, notice the conundrum that this leaves us in. Let me go ahead and pull up a passage by Muhammad. All right, here we go. This is Sahih Muslim. This is Muhammad. It is reported on the authority of Abu Hurairah that he heard the Messenger of Allah say, Sahih Muslim, number 34, I have been commanded to fight against people, not people who are attacking me, everyone. Notice, I've been commanded to fight against people till they testify to the fact that there is no God but Allah, and believe in me that I am the messenger from the Lord, and in all that I have brought. You have to believe everything this man brought as revelation. And when they do it, their blood and riches are guaranteed protection on my behalf, except where it is justified by law, and their affairs rest with Allah. So here Muhammad says, I'm commanded to fight people until they say that there's no God but Allah and I'm his messenger and they believe in everything I say, which would make you a Muslim. Right? So Muhammad says, I've been commanded to fight you until you become a Muslim. Now, it seems like if you've got these organizations and if you've got Ilhan Omar saying until everyone is free to practice their religion, no one is. Muhammad is saying no one's free to practice their religion unless that religion is Islam. That's what Muhammad is saying here. No one is free to practice their religion until they believe in Islam. And he's coming to fight you if you have the wrong religion. So if we believe what Ilhan Omar is saying, then we should say, oh my goodness, we need a special envoy in the government to combat this sort of teaching and to expose this sort of teaching. But we don't have that. What we have is Robert Spencer. He's exposing the teaching. I'm exposing the teaching. And we're called Islamophobes, and we need the government to crack down on us. This is why. Do you see why I'm confused, Robert? This is this quotation right in front of us, and the many other in the Muslim sources are things that if we agree with Ilhan Omar, if we agree with that federation that called you a violent extremist, if we agree with what they say about what constitutes violent extremism or a phobia, if we agree with them, then we should all be going after the teachings of Muhammad. We should all be exposing the teachings of Muhammad. And yet, when we do that, when we do what everyone says we're supposed to be doing, then they attack us for exposing it, and we're the enemies, not the actual teachings that call for violence against unbelievers just for being unbelievers.
Right. There's no consistency. It's total hypocrisy, because what it really is, the Islamophobia Bill, that is an attempt to bring Sharia blasphemy laws to the United States. Sharia blasphemy laws criminalize criticism of Islam. The dhimmis can't complain about their subjugated status, because if they do, it will get even worse. Their contract of so-called protection will be revoked, and their lives will be forfeit. So they learn never to say anything negative about Islam, Muhammad, or the Quran, and they know that if they do, they're liable to get killed. It'll be the same thing here. If this bill passes the Senate and becomes law, then this will be an extension of that prohibition on criticizing Islam.
Yeah, and we did have a question along these lines. Zoraida says, has this bill passed already? My understanding is that it's passed the House, but now it goes to the Senate. The president has already said he's on board with it. So basically, if it gets through the Senate, it'll be approved by the president, and then it's
very
law.
Likely. Since the Democrats control the Senate, and since the Republicans don't really have a clue any more than the Democrats about what this is all for, what it's intended to do, it's very likely to pass.
So if it passes the Senate, and then it will be signed off by the president, then what we will have is an official part of the federal government that is assigned to combat Islamophobia, where Islamophobia will be anything they decide that it means, because it's not defined.
Exactly.
And you and I, again, just to recap, you and I are called Islamophobes repeatedly simply for stating what Islam teaches, simply for talking about Muhammad or the Quran. We're called Islamophobes for that.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And so that's the idea, to silence you and me and every one of us who speaks out about the motivating ideology behind jihad terror and about the sources of the other oppression that we see coming out of people who observe Sharia.
And so Ilhan Omar says, until everyone is free to practice their religion, no one is. We look in places like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and so on. And if you go around practicing your religion and you're not a Muslim, or even if you are a Muslim and you're from the wrong sect of Islam, if you're just from the wrong sect of Islam, you're not free to practice your wrong sect of Islam in many places. And so according to Ilhan Omar, these are the problem areas. And yet it turns out that we are not allowed to speak against what's going on there, because we will now have the federal government after us.
Right.
Interesting.
It would be Islamophobic. If what you and I do is Islamophobic, then there's no way you can stand and criticize any kind of violence or oppression that is justified in Islamic law.
So if someone, as we all know, Muhammad said repeatedly, if anyone leaves his religion, kill him. If anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. And so if someone in a Muslim country says, you know what, I now reject Islam, I want to become a Christian, or I want to become a Hindu, according to Ilhan Omar, until that person is free to practice his religion, no one is. And yet Muhammad told his followers to execute these people. And so if someone in a Muslim country is executed for leaving Islam and choosing another religion, choosing to follow and believe in another religion, and we say, hey, that's wrong, you can't do that, the federal government's coming after us, not against the person who's executing people for leaving Islam.
That's it.
Interesting stuff.
It's sort of, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has foreshadowed this for a long time. I've seen this in their Islamophobia Observatory, where they list so-called incidents of Islamophobia. And so, for example, a Muslim cleric would say something like, kill the mushrikeen, those who associate partners with Allah, wherever you find them, which is, of course, a quote from the Quran, the verse of the sword. And then I would say at Jihad Watch, this Muslim cleric said, kill them wherever you find them. And that would go in the Islamophobia Observatory, but not what the original cleric had actually said. It's that they don't want these things reported, they don't want them quoted, they don't want them known. And that's really what they consider to be Islamophobia when we start to understand what the jihad imperative is really all about. That's what they want to keep us ignorant and complacent so that we do not resist it.
Very, very disturbing stuff here. And I have to say, Robert, I look at some of the more devout, what some of the more devout Muslims say about people like Ilhan Omar. And they say, she's not a real Muslim because she's siding with, she's siding with LGBTQ stuff and siding with all this other stuff. She's not real. And yet what's amazing is even these people who defend radically different things somehow agree. What they all agree on is you can't talk about Muhammad and the Quran. No matter how liberal or left you go, you still can't talk about Muhammad, and the government itself has to crack down on you. And another disturbing thing is that the social media platforms all end up falling in line on this stuff, right? Like if you're, let's say, if your name is Ali Dawa on YouTube, you can literally call for the execution of people like the apostate prophet. You can call for his death and say, I'm going to be watching as this man is executed as soon as we get our way. YouTube will respond, well, that's just part of lively debate. If I say Muhammad's a false prophet, I will actually get banned. That's what I got banned for the other day. I said Muhammad's a false prophet. Don't believe in him, believe in Jesus. I got banned, lost my appeal, got a 7-day ban, video taken down. Fortunately, we were able to get that to someone who had a shred of common sense to say, okay, if you want to make that the rule, fine. That's not in the rules. That's not in the rules that I can't say Muhammad's a false prophet. So they restored it. But notice, but that happens all the time. That happens almost every week with me, that they take down something where I said something about Muhammad. And so what you end up with is you have Sharia, and everyone says, we believe in freedom of speech, we believe in freedom of expression, we believe in freedom of religion. Then you have this thing called Sharia, which is against all of that. And then, but everyone over time, just more and more and more, they fall in line. The governments, the media, social media platforms, they all fall in line and end up doing the exact same thing that Sharia calls for when supposedly we're in a free society.
Well, that's the same social media giants that called me a violent extremist. It's their organization, the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, that did that. So I'm not surprised that they would take down a video where you're calling Muhammad a false prophet, because it's really the same kind of thing. You say anything negative about Islam, which includes reporting accurately on the deeds of Muslims done in the name of Islam and in accord with its teachings, and then you violated Sharia, and they're essentially going by that at this point.
And what's insane is if you were actually able to sit one of these people down, I mean, one of these people who are, running the tech platforms, the trust and safety teams, the organizations that make these kind of decisions, and you were to say something simple like, hey, if I say Muhammad's a false prophet, don't do what he says, you need to believe in something else. What is that? That's hate speech. That's hate speech. Okay, so I can't speak against what he said, any words against what he said. And then you just go right back to a passage. So do you agree, Mr. Trust and Safety Team, do you agree that Muhammad and his followers have been sent to fight against people till they testify that there's no God but Allah and believe in him, and that all other religions have to be subjugated to this? Do you agree with that? Should we oppose that? They can't answer, because if they say, no, I'm against that, well, they're an Islamophobe too. So they just have to call you an Islamophobe, hoping that they never have to actually deal with the problem.
These people they're just programmed bots. They're miseducated. They're told, dude, these people are racist bigots, and that's all they know. They've never had an original thought in their head in however many years they've been on the planet. They don't know anything. I admire your willingness to have a rational discussion with them. It's kind of like debating Islamic apologists, though. There's just no ground there for rational discussion.
Yeah. So, just to recap, everyone, it's, hey, until everyone is free to practice their religion, no one is. We have to stand against people and ideologies that stand in the way of the free expression of religion. Okay, well, I got a big one for you. Here's Islam. Ah, shut up, you Islamophobe. Don't. So it's.
That's it.
It's just amazing, these double standards. It's wow. All right, well, so we've talked about Ilhan Omar. Hope everyone is up to date on that now. So again, it's passed in the House. Now it's going to the Senate. If it gets through the Senate, it will definitely be approved by the president. And then the U.S. government will officially be against anyone who's committing the vague crime of Islamophobia, which they can then define however they want. All right, so I've heard that you have some stuffs for
I have
us.
so much stuffs, David. There was a very busy week, really. And I've got 6 mosque stories. And I think that that's important, since we all know that jihad terrorism has nothing whatsoever to do with Islam. It's interesting that mosques keep playing a role in it. But first, there is a more important story coming out of France. And this was on December 8th. And there was a Catholic church that was celebrating the Immaculate Conception on that day, a major feast in the Catholic Church, and a group of Muslims began to harass the procession and say, "You are infidels, you're a gang of whores, and even more importantly, get lost. This is not your country. And even more importantly, Wallah, on the Quran, I will cut your throat. And this is the land of Allah." And they began to spit on the priest, poured cold water on him, and make violent threats.
Now, where'd you say this was? Saudi Arabia?
No, it was in France.
Wait, did you say, when you say France, do you mean Pakistan?
It sounds like it, I know. But it was in a parish in Nanterre, Nanterre. I don't know how to speak French, but that's a city in France.
And here's the disturbing part, tying this together with what we were talking about earlier, right? If that had been a group of Christians outside, if we're talking about groups of Christians harassing Muslims, every news organization in the world would be all over this, and this would be the basis for why we really need to crack down on Islamophobia. If it's Muslims harassing Christians, then you're a racist and a bigot for even reporting what you just said, Robert. You're an Islamophobe for just reporting just what just happened, because by reporting the facts and saying, hey, this is a problem, you're calling for violence against all Muslims somehow, and you're calling for bloodshed. Whereas if anyone did something like that to Muslims, then of course we all have to unite and condemn this. What is going on here?
And there was not an English story, as far as I know. To the best of my knowledge, there was no English language story about this incident, even though the Interior Minister of France, Gerald Darmanin, spoke about it and vowed to fight this kind of thing energetically, which I do not believe he will do because it would lead him into Islamophobia. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, I had to get a French language news story about this translated because the English press doesn't think that any of this is important. But you're absolutely right. If it had been a group of Christians harassing a group of Muslims anywhere in the world, it would be screaming international headlines for day after day after day.
Mm-hmm. And we would need government crackdowns on Islamophobia. But if it's Muslims doing if it's Muslims doing it to another group, it actually needs to be hushed up. Right? Like there's a fair chance that this video right now, this live stream, will be taken down by YouTube simply because we're pointing that out. And that's how insane and hypocritical the leaders of these platforms are. That if it's happening to Muslims, everyone needs to unite in condemning it. And I agree. I agree. But absolutely, if it's Muslims doing it, everyone needs to shut up about it, or they will be silenced by the media, by governments, by the social media platforms. This world's turning into a really, really hilarious place.
Absolutely absurd. It's the age of absurdity that we're living in. Now, let's get to the mosque stories, shall we? I got so many of them, and then I've got a few other things too, if time permits after that. But let's see, the first mosque story I've got out of 6 comes out of Pakistan. Students at the Lal Masjid, the Red Mosque in Islamabad, were given lessons recently that were captured on video of how to behead. And so, I tried to find a story of a church giving lessons in beheading.
Couldn't find one?
Oddly enough, no.
That's
and yet
strange.
They tell me that all religions are equally capable of inspiring violence, and yet somehow this kind of thing only ever seems to happen in mosques.
And what would be the purpose of that? Why would you want to know how to behead someone the official Islamic way? What could they possibly use something like that for?
Well, David, chapter 47, verse 4 of the Quran says, when you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks. And then chapter 8, verse 12 actually says that Allah commanded the angels strike the necks and cut off their fingertips. Every now and then I come across a news story like that where somebody was not only beheaded, but his fingers were chopped off. And usually there was a story like this in New Jersey actually a few years back, and the cops were saying, well, it's clear they wanted to erase any way to identify the victims. And I thought, no, that has nothing to do with it, you dope. It's Quran, chapter 8, verse 12. Strike the necks and the fingertips. But anyway, that's why they have the beheading lessons at the Red Mosque in Islamabad.
And, I mean, we read tons of passages where Muhammad says, if anyone leaves his religion, kill him. But we have an instance where Ali was executing people by burning them. So the fourth of the rightly guided caliphs, Ali, who was burning people to death, and Ibn Abbas stepped in and said, no, that's not how you kill them. That's how Allah punishes them, with fire. You got to kill them the way Muhammad said to. But it's in Malik's Muwatta where Muhammad said, if anyone leaves his religion, strike off his head. So the official way that you're supposed to execute an apostate, execute someone for leaving his religion and choosing to practice his religion, which Ilhan Omar says no one's free until everyone can practice his own religion. If you decide you're going to practice, let's say, Christianity or something, you don't believe in Islam anymore, then you would be beheaded. And you're saying that at a mosque, they're being trained to behead unbelievers, apostates, things like that. All the things that someone like Ilhan Omar seems to say with her words you should be against. But as soon as you announce that you're against when Islam does these things, then you're an Islamophobe. The government has to crush and destroy you. And so this is some amazing stuff. And Robert, what do you think would happen if, a Hindu temple or a Christian church were training on how to execute people who leave and convert to Islam?
Here again, this would be an extraordinary international story, and the subject of commissions and conferences, and we would have to get all kinds of training to learn how to not be so Islamophobic and hateful or whatever it is. This is a total double standard and complete brazen hypocrisy. These kinds of stories come out of mosques and nobody bats an eye. But you're right. If it had been a church, forget it. Same thing here in a story out of the UK. The former chief imam at the Manchester excuse me, at the Manchester Islamic Center, Mustafa Graf, he was accused of preaching support for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Now, he says that this is actually something that was said about him by a rival who was just trying to discredit him. And so I'm not prejudging the case of Mustafa Graf, but I don't think that it is outside the realm of possibility that you could have an imam in a mosque in the UK or anywhere in the West preaching loyalty to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, because what Al-Qaeda and ISIS do is scrupulously carry out what is commanded in the Quran and Sunnah. And so I would fully expect an imam to notice that and approve of it. Well,
things are getting interesting here, and it's just It's just surprising to hear about all of these stories that would be endless international headlines and calls for a crackdown by governments around the world if these things were done by anyone except Muslims.
That's right. And that's really the story of my life, David. 20 years I've been doing this at Jihad Watch, and there I could give you literally thousands of stories that would be incredibly huge headlines if they had been done by non-Muslims, but by Muslims, they just passed by unnoticed. Next we have, let's see, the story next comes out of Israel. And this is about a young man, 18-year-old, named Mohammed Bnei Odeh, who stabbed a 67-year-old Israeli Jew who was out walking with his wife, just randomly stabbed him in the street. Now, this kind of thing happens all too frequently. But what's noteworthy about this is that Mohammed Bnei Odeh then fled into a nearby mosque. And I think it's noteworthy that he thought that he would be able to find sanctuary in a mosque. You don't usually hear about people who commit murders or commit attempted murders, then running into the nearest church and thinking they'll find sanctuary there. But there are numerous stories over the years of jihad terrorists fleeing into mosques. And this raises once again the question of, well, what exactly does Islam teach? And excuse me, would they really find what he had done to be so bad? And maybe that's why he ran into the mosque.
And if experience is any indication, I would guess it's, well, you're supposed to fight oppressors, and they're the oppressors, so you're supposed to fight them. Something along those lines. And Robert, what do you think would happen if let's say a devout young Jewish man were to walk up to a Muslim couple, start stabbing, and then flee, and head into a local Jewish center or something like that? Would that be newsworthy?
Oh my goodness. I would imagine that would be shock and horror all over the world.
You think Ilhan Omar would have a problem with it?
Yeah, Ilhan Omar would say this is terrible Islamophobia and demand that the various Jewish groups in the United States denounce this, which they would have already have done probably. And it would just go on and on and on forever about how this is an indication of how the oppressive Israelis are mistreating the Palestinians. But she's not going to say anything about this. I can guarantee that.
And here's what's interesting about this. So right now, I mean, the House of Representatives decided, of all the stuff that's going on in the world, what we really need to focus on right now is Islamophobia. If you look globally, the most persecuted group is Christians, right? That's been repeatedly shown. Globally, the most persecuted group is Christians. And unless it's changed very recently, I remember a few years ago in the United States, as far as religious believers are concerned, Jews were disproportionately targeted more than any other groups. And so if you look at the globe, then the biggest concern should be the persecution against Christians. And if you're looking at the United States, the biggest concern should be the persecution against Jews. And again, if you're looking at the globe, you do have, communist countries and stuff like China who have a problem with both Muslims and Christians, because they're atheistic, and as far as communistic thought, religion is the opium of the masses. It stands in the way of the full flourishing of communism, and so you have to crush them and so on. So you have communist countries that crack down on Christians, but a large part of the persecution of Christians would be in Muslim countries. And yet the concern of the government right now is not, hey, what do we do about this persecution of Christians is how can we, the government of the United States, stop people from pointing out this persecution of Christians in Muslim countries? How are we going to crack down on the people who speak about this? Because it's Islamophobia.
That's right, David. And you know something also, the United States government has an ambassador for international religious freedom. And for years, the ambassador for international religious freedom, the last one was former Senator Sam Brownback, he spoke out very strongly against the persecution of Christians, even when it took place in Muslim lands. But the Biden administration has named Rashad Hussain to be the ambassador for international religious freedom. He is a Sharia adherent, devout Muslim. He's memorized the entire Quran and is the former envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation under the Barack Obama administration. So the question for Rashad Hussain that nobody will dare to ask him, but really should be asked of him, is what are you going to do when it comes down to Muslims treating Christians in the way that they are directed to do in the Quran and in Islamic law? Are you going to consider that a violation of religious freedom in accord with the U.S. Constitution, or you can consider that the natural order of things in accord with Sharia? But nobody dares ask questions like that because they would be Islamophobic.
So you say this man's memorized the entire Quran?
Yeah, he's a Hafiz.
So he's memorized, fight those who do not believe in Allah, Surah 9, verse 29?
Absolutely. So if they're supposed to pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued, when you have ISIS telling the Christians in Syria a few years back that they had to pay the jizya and submit, would he have thought that a violation of religious freedom or not? It's in the Quran.
So you're telling me this guy is memorized Surah 48, verse 29. Yes. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are severe against disbelievers and merciful among themselves. He's got that. This dude has this on speed dial in his head.
Yep. He's got 98.6 too.
98.6, which calls Jews and Christians and idolaters the worst of creatures?
Indeed. So there you go.
Wait.
He's got it all in his head.
Does he also have Surah 3, verse 110, that Muslims are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind? Does he have that in his head?
Why, yes, David, he does.
So does he have that part about Muhammad being commanded not just to fight against unbelievers, but also against hypocrites?
Sure.
Wow. So this guy has some disturbing stuff in his head. Wow. Okay.
And he loves it. He thinks it's great.
All right.
I don't think it's an illegitimate question to ask him where his loyalty is going to fall with Sharia or with the U.S. Constitution. But the question has been ruled out of order a priori.
It would be Islamophobic.
Exactly. I got more mosque stories here, David.
Really? It's hard to believe there could be so many mosque stories.
In just a week. This is only going back a week.
So we're not going back like years.
No, sir. This has all happened in the last week. The Grand Mosque of Paris is holding a contest, a hadith memorization contest.
Wait. Yeah, wait. You mean hadiths like...
Oh, yeah.
Hadiths like...
As a matter of fact, David, in the news story that I have at Jihad Watch about this, the very first hadith that they're supposed to memorize is, I've been commanded to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, until they perform the prayer and pay the zakat.
Wow, that's a coincidence, because that's the one I just put up on the screen.
There you go.
Wow.
So there are various others. Allah has prescribed that you should do good in all things. So when you kill well. And when you cut the throat well. Each of you should sharpen his knife and kill his sacrifice properly.
Wait, so hang on. So you're saying in one mosque they're having a recitation, memorization competition for who can memorize all these hadiths about fighting and subjugating and slaughtering unbelievers in the name of Allah. Then at another mosque, they're practicing their beheading techniques.
Yes. And this is actually the Grand Mosque of Paris. This is not some street corner mosque that's set up in a 7-Eleven that closed or something. This is the Grand Mosque of Paris, and they are teaching that you have to fight unbelievers until they confess that there is no God but Allah. And so these things are not Islamophobic passages that you and I dug out of dusty books. This is current and being taught right now in the Grand Mosque of Paris.
Now, I mean, I was watching CNN earlier. I didn't see that. So which CNN program were you watching when you found this information?
This is another story I got out of the French press. It was not reported in the English press, as far as I know, not at all.
Now, I hate to keep rehashing the entire point, but the fundamental problem in all of this is one of hypocrisy and double standards, as far as I'm concerned. But if a Christian church was having a competition for who could memorize a bunch of I don't know, like a bunch of statements about how Christians are supposed to go and kill people for having the wrong religion, and then another Christian church was out there practicing to become the future beheaders of all of these people, do you think we'd hear about it somewhere other than a French news agency?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But the hypocrisy is absolutely 100% total, all pervasive.
Wow.
I have another one out of Israel.
What?
Another story out of a mosque.
Another mosque story? How many mosque stories are there?
There are 6 this week.
Oh, wow.
Almost one every day.
And keep in mind, any one of these, if it were a church, would be newsworthy. But because it's a mosque, it's not only is it not newsworthy, you're a racist and a bigot and an Islamophobe, and the U.S. government needs to crush and destroy you for even mentioning it.
That's it. So in this one, a Muslim named Muhammad Sunukrut, who is a resident of Israel, he went to Ramallah and met in a mosque with a friend, and his friend asked him to join in a terrorist operation, and he agreed. And he provided the jihadis with 5 liters of hydrogen peroxide for the production of explosives after this meeting in a mosque to plot the terror attacks. Here again, we see that we're constantly told in the West that Islam is a religion of peace and it rejects all violence and terrorism. Even the Pope has said authentic Islam and the proper reading of the Quran reject every form of violence. And I don't know what he was smoking at the time, but in any case, the fact that a terror attack would be planned in a mosque by people who would not bat an eye about being there to do it is just an indication that they understand very well that their religion commands this warfare against unbelievers. And so a mosque is an entirely appropriate place for them to plot these massacres.
Yeah, and I mean, I can think about every church I've ever been in. If I said, hey, guys, I need to borrow the church here so I can build my bombs and this and that, they'd report me, or they'd think I'd gone insane and call some mental health services or something like that. But apparently there's just a lot going on in mosques there. So they're building the materials for warfare. They're practicing their beheading for when they get to carry out their Sharia penalties. They're memorizing the passages that call for this violence. And yet, here again, we're Islamophobes and bigots because we're talking about it and mentioning it and not completely ignoring it. And the government needs to crack down on us. The U.S. government, according to Congress, the U.S. government needs to stop us from speaking about this, because otherwise they'd be Islamophobes too, and they can't have that.
There you go. The last one is out of Cyprus. It's a little different. This one takes it in a bit of a different direction. What happened was on the island of Cyprus, in the Greek part, because as you know, Turkey occupied northern Cyprus in 1974 and expelled hundreds of thousands of Greek Cypriots from their homes, and they have never been allowed to return. But in any case, in the Greek Cypriot part, there was a Syrian Muslim migrant who went to a mosque, because there are mosques in the Greek part of Cyprus, no churches in the Turkish part of Cyprus. But in any case, he went to the mosque and he asked if he could stay there overnight, and they said no. And so he was furious, and he tried to set fire to the mosque. Now, mind you, this is a Muslim, a Syrian migrant. But Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, said that this was an example of Cyprus's Islamophobia, that they would allow the mosque to be set fire, although it was not harmed. And he is vowing retaliation, which may take the form of military action against the Greek part of Cyprus. Now, I think what's noteworthy about this, among other things, is that this shows the elasticity of the term Islamophobia. Mm-hmm. That you even have a Muslim here who everybody acknowledges is the one who is responsible for the attempted burning of the mosque. But Erdogan doesn't care. He is using Islamophobia opportunistically in order to justify some future action against Cyprus. And I think this illustrates very well how pernicious a term it really is, because it can be used for virtually anything.
And apparently the only thing it can't be used for is actually being rationally concerned about Islam. I mean, if you are rationally concerned about Islam, it must be irrational and therefore a phobia. But I mean, guys, just imagine. So Robert, if I understand you correctly, a Muslim asked to stay in a mosque in the Greek part of Cyprus because he didn't have a place to stay. They said no. He got mad, tried to set the place on fire, didn't work very well, and now the Islamic government of Turkey sounds like they have plans of invading to declare war on this Islamophobic part of Cyprus because of what a Muslim did. And notice, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, if you're talking about, let's say, a Muslim majority country and you have a Christian church and there was a Christian traveler and the Christian traveler said, hey, let's say Pakistan, a Christian traveler said, hey, I don't have any place to stay. Can I stay in the church? And the church says no. And the Christian tries to burn down the church, and then other countries with Christian majority populations say, now we have to invade Pakistan because of their anti-Christian bigotry in allowing this Christian to try to burn down a church. You'd think that sounds absolutely insane. Yes. And yet it's actually the world we live in. And if you bring up any of it, again, there's a good chance that this live stream will be removed as hate speech by the YouTube censors, just because all we've done is report some facts and quote some sources and expose some hypocrisy, and that's too much in the world we live in.
That's right. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, by the way, the president of Turkey, has made it very clear he wants to revive the Ottoman Empire. He has even said that Turkey has a right to all the territory that the Ottoman Empire once occupied, which is essentially a declaration of war, or an intention of declaration of war, against Eastern Europe, North Africa, Egypt, most of the Middle East.
And I recall a Quranic basis for that when Allah commanded, drive them out from whence they drove you out.
There you go.
And isn't that the theological basis behind the claim that Islam has to take back Israel? And that's why you even have lots of Muslim leaders who aren't in favor of any sort of two-state solution, which was repeatedly offered to them over time, and they rejected it repeatedly because it's all theirs, because it was once controlled by Islam. And then, yes, as you've pointed out, I mean, all the way up into Europe, Spain, this all has to be taken back, and the focus is on Israel just because that's the closest to the heart of the Muslim world.
Also because it's Jews who are the worst enemies of the Muslims. Mm-hmm. Chapter 5, verse 82.
And so once again, if we were to say, hey, there's this problem because you've got all these areas that are no longer Islamic, and yet according to Muslim leaders, these places have to be taken back, seized. So these are places that are in a perpetual state of war, according to Islam. Even if they're not focusing on them yet, the goal would be to eventually take them back and seize them. And if we were to say, hey, according to Islam, the reason for this ongoing violence is they have to take these places back because that's what they're commanded, we would be the Islamophobes, we would be the bigots, we would be the racists, and that's just how things work in the world today.
Welcome to the age of absurdity, David.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, we've been going about an hour, and we want to keep these shows to about an hour so that people, Robert and I have talked about it before. I usually am not going to click on anything that says 3 hours, unless it's something I just have to absolutely see. So we want to keep these relatively short, just so everyone can stay updated on what's happening this week in Jihad. Any final comments, Robert?
David, the Islamophobia initiative is going to continue, and people really need to wake up because this is a serious challenge to the freedom of speech, which is a foundation of any free society. And so you might think, well, I'm not an Islamophobe. I'm not going to say anything critical about Islam. I don't think anything about Islam at all. But remember, that's not going to end with that either. Once they start to erode the freedom of speech, they're not going to stop. There are going to be many other things that they will get to after they've silenced all us Islamophobes.
Yeah, and I mean, you nailed it right there. I mean, there are lots of people who don't think they need to be concerned about this because it's not affecting them directly. Whereas if people like Ilhan Omar and so on and these various organizations get their way, they'll eventually silence us. I mean, we could still talk in our houses maybe or something like that, but we won't be allowed to speak publicly. And if they get their way, I mean, we'll be jailed and imprisoned or something down the road. But notice, if they just are able to silence us, a lot of people, I don't really care about this stuff. It's not affecting me directly. What do you then do when it does affect you directly? And when people are being, when you do start to realize that it's a problem, when you do find out what's going on in mosques and being trained to behead people and so on, what happens when you do figure that out and then you're no longer allowed to speak? And I mean, it's coming. Yeah, it seems like there should be some preemptive speaking out against things. And notice, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking entirely peaceful here. We're not talking about going and fighting and subjugating anyone. The actual leaders who are calling for violent subjugation, they're exempt from criticism. We speak out against that. We're the ones who have to be silenced. Very, very strange world. All right, well, Robert, I'm hoping that there's absolutely no news to cover between now and next week, so that we won't even need a program about this week in Jihad. Somehow I think we're going to be back next week talking about this week in Jihad.
I somehow have the same feeling. All these years of Jihad watching, I've always thought maybe someday I can take a day off, but they never do. So there it is.
The jihadis don't take days off, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it from Robert Spencer. All right. We'll catch you all later, and hopefully we won't be talking to you next week, but we'll be talking to you next week.
Likelihood, yeah.